The city had been holding its breath for weeks. First, it was the distant thunder, like a summer storm that never arrived. Then, the airplanes, their engines a low, sickening drone that made the windows rattle. Now, the storm was here, and it had settled in for a long stay. The enemy army surrounded the city like a tightening belt, cutting off the roads, the trains, the telephone wires. The world outside shrank to the few streets you could still walk. And even those felt dangerous. In a small third-floor apartment with a single window facing the street, a man sat very still in his favorite chair. He did not watch the gray sky or the hurried, hunched figures below. He could not. He had lost his sight to illness more than 20 years ago. His name was Leff, and his world was built of sound, touch, and memory. The siege made his world sharper and more terrifying. His ears, always his guides, now painted pictures he wished he couldn't see. The sharp crack of a rifle, too close. The heavy, grinding roar of a truck full of soldiers. The different kinds of silence, the fearful hush of people hiding in their halls, and the deep, empty silence of apartments where families had fled. He knew the sound of hope leaving a city. It sounded like footsteps, getting quieter. His daughter was his eyes. She was a nurse, or she had been before the hospital became more of a shelter for the wounded and the scared. She would come home smelling of antiseptic and exhaustion, take his hand, and describe the world. She didn't lie, but she filtered it. She would tell him about the long bread line, but not about the fight that broke out at the front. She would mention the new checkpoints, but not the people she saw being taken away from them. The sun tried to come out today, she might say, helping him chop the last of their precious potatoes. It lit up the dust in the air, made it look like gold. She focused on the gold dust, not the dust of rubble. One evening, she came home later than usual. He heard her key fumble in the lock, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She didn't speak. She took off her coat, the wool heavy with the damp cold, and went to the sink. He heard the water splash, a sound they were trying to use less of. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. His hands, resting on the knotted wood of his cane, were still. She was quiet for a long moment. "They took old man Stefan from the bakery," she finally said, her voice flat. "Someone said they heard a radio in his room. A transmitter. They just came and took him. No one warned him." Leff felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Old man Stefan had a laugh like grinding gears and always saved his slightly burnt loaves for Leff, knowing he cared more for the warmth and the crust than the look of it. How can they know? Leff whispered. "About a radio? About whispers?" "They listen," his daughter said, coming to sit beside him. He felt the cushion dip. "They have ears everywhere. In the walls, in the streets. People are scared to talk. It's like the city is going mute." Leff stood up, his hand finding the familiar path to the upright piano that took up too much space in their small living room. It was his anchor. He had been a musician before the darkness, a tuner for the concert hall after. The piano was not just an instrument. It was his map, his clock, his companion. He let his fingers find the keys, cool and smooth. He didn't play a tune, just let a single low C hang in the quiet room. The sound was a solid thing, a truth. "They listened to everything," his daughter repeated, almost to herself. Then she went very still. Leff could sense the shift in her, a sudden alertness like a bird. "Papa," she said, and her voice was different. It had a spark in it, a tiny, fragile light. "They listened to everything. What if? What if we made them listen on purpose?" Leff tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "Your music. You play every day. The soldiers in the building across the street, they hear it. The whole street hears it. It's just the blind man and his piano," Yes, harmless, beautiful even. And Lef prompted, and what if the music said something else? Not just for us, for the others. The idea unfurled in Lef's mind like a slow melody. A code, not with words, which could be trapped and dissected, but with feeling, with memory, with song. His heart began to beat a little faster. What would we say? He asked. She moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, though only the walls could hear. We need to know if the other is safe. If I come home from the hospital and hear you playing, something happy, something bright, then I know you are well, and the apartment is safe for me to enter. If I hear something slow, sad, I know to keep walking, to find somewhere else to wait. Lef nodded slowly. The Mozart. The sonata in C major, the one that sounds like sunlight on water. That means all is well. Yes, she said, a touch of excitement in her voice. And the folk song, the one Mama loved, the one about the lonely shepherd. Play it slow, play it deliberately. That will mean danger. Do not come home. They practiced it that night, like a game, but a game with cold, serious rules. She would go into the bedroom and pretend to leave. Lef would sit at the piano. He would play 8 bars of the Mozart, light and quick. She would come out and say, I am safe. Then he would play the folk tune, dragging the tempo, making the joyful melody sound like a warning bell. She would stay hidden and then call out, I am waiting. They refined it. A specific Beethoven bagatelle, short and fiery, meant I need you to come home now. A gentle lullaby by Schumann, played at the usual hour, meant the coast is clear for the nightly news, which was her whispering to him what she had really seen that day. For the first time since the siege began, Lef felt a flicker of power. His blindness, his isolation, had made him feel like a burden, a man who could only wait and listen to the world fall apart. But this was something he could do. His ears, his fingers, his memory for music, they were not just for solace anymore. They were tools. They were a secret language. That night, after his daughter had gone to sleep, Lef sat at the piano again. He didn't play the code. He played for himself. A quiet, meandering piece by Chopin, full of longing and unresolved questions. He knew the young lieutenant, who had moved into the apartment across the street, was probably listening. Let him listen. Let him hear the beauty and the sorrow. For now, it was just music. A blind man talking to the night. But tomorrow, it would be more. Tomorrow, the first message would be sent. As he finished the piece, his hands resting in his lap, he felt not hope. Exactly hope was too scarce a commodity, but purpose. The silence of the besieged city was no longer just something to fear. It was a canvas, and he had just begun to paint upon it with sound. The first time they used the code for real, his hands shook. His daughter had left for the hospital before dawn, a shadow slipping into the gray morning. The apartment felt too large, filled with the hollow echoes of distant shelling. He waited, his breakfast of weak tea and a hard biscuit untouched. The clock ticked, a mechanical heartbeat in the silent room. Then he heard it. Not the Mozart, not the all clear. Instead, from the street below, came the sharp, official bark of a command, the thud of heavy boots stopping right outside their building. His blood went cold. He knew the sound of a patrol digging in, setting up a checkpoint. They would be there for hours, stopping everyone, asking questions, looking into bags and faces. He had to warn her. She would be coming home tired, her mind on the patients, not expecting trouble at her own doorstep. She would walk right into their hands. He moved to the piano, his cane tapping a frantic rhythm on the floorboards. He sat, took a deep breath to steady himself, and placed his hands on the keys. He began the folk song, the one about the shepherd. But he played it not with joy, not with its usual bouncing rhythm. He played it slowly, each note a heavy, deliberate step. He made the happy melody sound mournful, lost. He repeated the first phrase, then repeated it again, louder, insisting on its sadness. He played for a full 5 minutes, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then he stopped, listening with every fiber of his being. He heard the rough voices of the soldiers below, laughing at some joke. But he did not hear his daughter's light, quick step on the stair. He waited an hour, the fear a sour taste in his mouth. Then, carefully, he played the 8 bars of the Mozart, the all clear, just in case she was hiding nearby and needed the signal to finally approach Dot. It was late afternoon, when her key finally turned in the lock. She rushed in, her coat cold from the outside air, and took his hands. "I heard it," she whispered, her voice full of awe and relief. "I was at the corner, and I heard the slow song. I just turned and walked to Katerina's apartment and waited. I watched from her window. They were stopping everyone. You saved me from 3 hours of questioning, maybe worse." He squeezed her hands, a wave of fierce pride washing through the fear. It worked. Their simple musical idea had worked. The next day, his daughter came home with a different kind of energy. She had a friend, the wife of the man who owned the watch repair shop downstairs. This friend, a woman with a voice like rustling paper, was connected to others. People were organizing, trying to help each other, sharing scraps of food and information. It was dangerous to speak of it, but it was happening. Over a tiny cup of bitter chicory coffee, his daughter told the friend about the piano, about the code. The woman was silent for a long time. "My husband. He sometimes carries things," she said carefully. "Messages. Small packages. He needs to know if the street is watched, if it is safe to leave or return." She asked if Leff would be willing to play for a wider circle. Not complex messages, but simple, vital ones. A signal for the whole little network on their street. Leff agreed without hesitation. It gave his days a structure, a meaning beyond waiting. A new list was born, memorized, never written down. It was decided that Leff would play at certain times mid-morning, early evening, so people would know to listen. The music was chosen carefully. Common pieces, the kind a lonely man might play, but each with a specific job. Beethoven's Für Elise, its familiar opening notes dancing and light, was the most dangerous signal. It meant a raid is coming. Hide your contraband. Hide your people. Now. The first few bars of a particular Brahms lullaby, gentle and rolling, meant the patrol has passed. The street is clear for now. A loud, firm chord progression from a national folk song, but not the forbidden verses, meant a food distribution is happening at the old square. Go, if you can. Leff became the neighborhood's living alarm clock, their canary in the coal mine. He would sit by the window, his face turned to the glass, not seeing but listening with an intensity that made his head ache. He learned to filter the sounds of the street, the difference between a routine truck and one that was slowing to a stop, the specific cadence of the secret police's boots versus the regular army. One afternoon, he heard the screech of a specific vehicle, a sound that curdled his blood. He didn't wait. He moved to the piano and launched into Für Elise, playing it with a frantic, hurried tempo, the notes tripping over each other in warning. He played it through 3 times. Later, his daughter heard from the watchmaker's wife that her husband had been about to open a hidden panel in his shop wall when he heard the music. He stopped, sat at his bench, and was pretending to repair a watch when the soldiers stormed in. They found nothing. The watchmaker's wife came up to thank Leff personally. She took his rough, tuner's hands in her soft ones and cried silent tears onto them. He felt useful. He felt woven back into the fabric of the community, not as a burden, but as a vital thread. But the strain was immense. The responsibility was a weight on his shoulders. A mistake in a note, a moment of hesitation, could doom someone. He began to dream in music, nightmares where he played the wrong song and soldiers burst through his door. He stopped playing for pleasure. The piano was now a tool, a machine of war, and its beautiful voice felt twisted. His daughter saw the shadows under his eyes, the new tightness in his jaw. One evening, after he had played the all-clear Brahms lullaby, she sat beside him on the piano bench. "Play something for you," she said softly. "Not for them, not for us. For you, the one you played for Mama." He shook his head. "It doesn't feel right." "Please," she insisted. "We need to remember what we are protecting. It's not just about hiding and warning. It's about this too." Her words found a crack in his armor. Slowly, hesitantly, he began a piece by Debussy, Clair de Lune. It was all soft moonlight and quiet reflections, a world away from checkpoints and fear. He played it slowly, feeling the emotion in the chords. Remembering his wife's face when he first played it for her, a lifetime ago dot as the last note faded. They both sat in the deep, peaceful silence it left behind. And then, from somewhere outside, faint but clear, came a sound. It was the sound of hands clapping. 3 slow, deliberate claps from an open window across the street. Then 2 more from an apartment above. It wasn't loud or showy. It was quiet, secret, and full of gratitude. Lef's breath caught. A smile, the first genuine one in weeks, touched his lips. His daughter put her arm around his shoulders. "They're listening," she whispered. "Yes," he said, his voice thick. "And they understand." The piano was no longer just a tool. It had become a lifeline, and he was the one holding both ends. The music was their conversation, their shield, and their shared memory of a better world. In the deepening twilight of the besieged city, the blind man played on, his fingers speaking a language of danger and hope that every listening heart could understand. The music did not go unnoticed. In the apartment directly across the narrow street, a young lieutenant of the occupying force stood by his window, a cigarette forgotten between his fingers. He was a man with careful eyes and a mind that appreciated order. The chaos of war disturbed him, and he found small comforts where he could a well-polished boot. A precisely written report, a beautifully played piece of music. For weeks. The music from the blind man's apartment had been a curious punctuation to his days. It was inconsistent, which was the first thing that sparked his professional interest. Some days the old man would play for hours, meandering through sonatas and preludes. Other days there would be only short, sharp bursts of song at very specific times, mid-morning, just after 5. It was too regular to be mere chance, too deliberate for simple melancholy. The lieutenant began, quietly, to take notes. Not official ones, but mental ones. He recognized the pieces. He had studied piano as a boy, forced by a mother who valued culture above all. He knew the Mozart sonata. He knew the Beethoven. He knew the folk tunes. What struck him was the way they were played. The same piece could sound like a sigh one day and a shout the next. The tempo was the key. The folk song, usually so cheerful, sometimes dragged like a funeral march, a code. It had to be. His training told him to report it, to have the old man and his daughter brought in for questioning. A blind man could be a clever spy. But another part of him, the part that clung to the memory of his mother's parlor and the scent of polish on their own piano, hesitated. The music was so beautiful. It was the only beautiful thing left on this gray, frightened street. To crush it felt like a special kind of vandalism, so he watched. He listened. He saw the nurse daughter come and go. He saw how neighbors would sometimes pause on the street when a certain song was playing, then change their direction. His suspicion hardened into certainty. This was a network. The piano was its heart. One evening, the decision came to a head. He had received orders for a surprise sweep of the block, a search for contraband radios. It was set for the next morning. As he looked over the paperwork, the first few notes of a piece floated across the street. It was Schumann's Traumerei Dreaming. It was played not as a signal, but with a deep personal sorrow that made the lieutenant's breath catch. It was the sound of a man remembering a world that was gone. The lieutenant acted on an impulse he could not fully explain. He left his apartment, crossed the silent street, and climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. He knocked on the door, the sound loud and official in the quiet hall. He heard the music stop. A pause, then light footsteps. The daughter opened the door, her face pale, her eyes wide with instant fear. She tried to block his view. "I wish to speak to the musician," the lieutenant said in her language. His accent clean but foreign. "My father is tired," she started. But Leff's calm voice came from inside. "It is all right. Let the officer in." The lieutenant entered the small, tidy apartment. He saw the piano, the simple furniture, the blind man sitting straight-backed on the bench, his hands folded in his lap. The room felt charged, like the air before a storm. "Your playing is very good," the lieutenant said, standing formally. "Thank you," Leff said, his face turned toward the sound of the voice. "It passes the time. You play certain pieces very often." "At certain times." The lieutenant let the observation hang. Leff was silent for a moment. Then he said, "A blind man's day needs structure. The light changes, I cannot see it. So I mark the hours with music. The bright pieces for the morning, the quieter ones for the evening." His explanation was smooth, practiced. It was the truth, but not all of it. The lieutenant walked slowly around the room. He saw no radio, no leaflets, nothing suspicious. Only a home clinging to normalcy. He stopped by the piano. "You played Traumerei. It is a favorite of mine." "It is a piece for remembering," Leff said softly. The lieutenant looked at the old man's unseeing eyes, at the daughter standing rigidly by the stove, ready to defend her father with her bare hands if needed. He felt a sudden, profound weariness. Here was a man speaking in the only language he had left, and he, the lieutenant, was tasked with silencing it. For what? To find a few extra potatoes? A forbidden book? He made his choice. It was not an act of rebellion, but of preservation. "My mother loved that piece," the lieutenant said, his voice losing its official edge. "She said it was like a photograph made of sound." He saw the surprise on the daughter's face. Leff simply nodded. "She was a wise woman." "The piece you play in the mornings," the lieutenant continued, as if making conversation. "The Mozart. It is very optimistic. It is good to start the day with such music." He paused, letting his meaning sink in. It would be a shame if anything interrupted it. If, for example, someone were to play something more dramatic, more alarming, early in the day. It might upset the neighbors. A heavy silence filled the room. Leff understood perfectly. The lieutenant was telling them he knew, and he was also giving them a warning, wrapped in a strange courtesy. Asterisk, if you are going to sound an alarm, do it well before the raid. Let people prepare. Asterisk, I will consider that, Leff said, his voice steady. I would not wish to cause alarm unnecessarily. Good, the lieutenant said. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. He looked back at the blind pianist. Please, play the Schumann again. For my mother. And he left, closing the door softly behind him. Leff and his daughter did not move or speak for a full minute. The meaning of the visit crashed over them in waves. They were exposed. Their secret was known to the enemy, but the enemy had not crushed them. He had acknowledged them. He had asked for music. With trembling hands, Leff turned back to the keys. He played True Marie again, from the beginning. This time, the sorrow was mixed with something else, a thread of confusion, of fragile, bewildered connection. Across the street, the lieutenant stood again at his window. He listened to the music, the shared dream. He had drawn a line, a dangerous, personal line. He would not report them. Not yet. He would let the music continue. In doing so, he had made himself complicit. He had chosen the fragile beauty of a code over the rigid demands of his duty. He didn't know why. Perhaps because in the blind man's songs, he heard echoes of his own lost world, a world where a piano was just a piano, and a song was just a dream. From that day on, the listening changed. It was no longer just the neighborhood and the lieutenant as a threat. It was a secret, silent pact. The lieutenant would hear the warning in the music, and in his way, heed it. He would delay his patrol's turn onto the street by a few minutes if he heard the alarm. He would look the other way if he saw a neighbor scurrying home after a particular chord. The music had built a bridge, fragile as a spider's web, across the divide of war. It connected the watched and the watcher in a conspiracy of sound. Leff played, knowing one of his most attentive listeners was the man who could destroy them all. And the lieutenant listened, clinging to the humanity in the notes. A humanity as uniform required him to forget. In the gray silence of the siege, the piano's voice became a territory neither fully owned nor completely conquered. A small shared space where the rules were different. And for a few minutes each day, they were simply two men listening. The fragile peace, built on music and a lieutenant's quiet look the other way, could not last. The war outside the windows grew louder, hungrier. The distant thunder of artillery was now a constant companion, a grumble in the belly of the city. Food was a memory. Hope was rationed in smaller and smaller portions. One bitter afternoon, the watchmaker's wife came to their door. Her usual rustling paper voice was taut with fear. She did not enter, just whispered urgently to Lev's daughter on the landing. The message was simple and terrifying. A major sweep was planned for their district at dawn. Not a random check, but a systematic house-by-house search. They were looking for a hidden printing press, and they would tear the buildings apart to find it. People needed to move, to hide anything and everything. Can he warn them? The woman breathed. Not just our street. The whole block needs to hear it, clear as a bell. They need time. Leff's daughter came inside, her face ashen. She explained. This was different. This was not about a patrol passing. This was about survival. Leff felt the weight settle on him, heavier than ever before. This signal had to be impossible to miss, to ignore. It had to cut through closed windows and fearful thoughts. They decided on a piece they had never used for the code harsh. Modern piece by a composer from their own country, all crashing dissonance and frantic rhythm. It was music that sounded like panic itself. As evening fell, a deep quiet blanketed the street. It was the quiet of held breath. Leff sat at the piano, his hands cold. He could feel the expectant hush of the entire neighborhood. They were waiting for him. Their safety depended on the sound that would come from his fingers. He began. The music was not beautiful. It was a weapon. He struck the keys with a force that made the old piano shudder, sending out a cascade of jarring, clashing chords. He played it loud, drowning out the faint whine of the wind outside. He played it with a furious, driving tempo, a musical scream. He played it through once, then immediately launched into it again, even louder. His daughter stood by the window, a silent sentinel. On the second repetition, she gasped. "Papa," she whispered, her voice strained. A truck. It just stopped. outside our building. Lef did not stop. He played on. The warning had to be complete. He had to give everyone every possible second. Heavy boots hit the cobblestones. Not the casual stroll of a patrol, but the purposeful, synchronized tread of a prepared unit. The boots entered their building. The stairwell echoed with their climb. "They're coming up here," his daughter said, her voice suddenly calm. Flat, still, Lef played. He played the frantic warning piece for a third time, his fingers pounding the keys until they ached. The boots stopped outside their door. There was a terrible final silence. Then the door did not open with a knock. It exploded inwards, splintering wood and tearing the lock from the frame. Soldiers poured into the small room, their uniforms a blur of dark gray, their faces hard and impersonal. His daughter rushed forward, putting herself between the soldiers and her father. "What is the meaning of this?" "He is just a blind man. He is playing his piano." One of the soldiers, a sergeant with a face like stone, shoved her aside. She stumbled against the wall, but did not fall. Lef finally let his hands fall from the keys. The sudden silence in the room was deafening, worse than the music had been. The sergeant looked at Lef, then at the piano. "A blind man," he said, his voice dripping with contempt, "playing a very interesting song. A very loud song, almost like an alarm." Lef kept his face turned down, his blind eyes fixed on the keyboard. He said nothing. The sergeant stepped closer. "Who were you playing for? Who were you warning?" "I play for myself," Lef said, his voice low but clear. "The music. It is what I have left." "You play different songs at different times," the sergeant pressed, repeating the lieutenant's observation, but with a vicious edge. "We have been listening. It is a code. Tell me what it means." "I mark the hours with music," Lef repeated his practiced line, his heart hammering. "It is the only clock I can see." The sergeant's patience snapped. He barked an order. Two soldiers grabbed Lef by his arms, hauling him up from the bench. His cane clattered to the floor. His daughter cried out and lunged forward, but another soldier held her back. This was it. They were taking him. In the chaos, in the terrible noise of the soldiers and her own struggling, Lef knew he might never see his daughter again. He had to say it. He had to give her one last message, a truth the soldiers could not understand. As they dragged him towards the shattered doorway, he turned his head towards the sound of her cries. He did not shout, "I love you." That was a phrase the soldiers knew. Instead, he called out a title, a piece of music, his voice cutting through the din. Solveig's song. He shouted it with all the force left in his lungs. The soldiers jerked him forward, thinking it was nonsense, the ranting of a frightened old man. But his daughter heard it. She stopped struggling for a second, her breath catching in a sob. Solveig's song. The piece by Grieg about a woman waiting a lifetime for her love to return. It was their secret, their deepest code. It had one meaning, decided on a night long ago when they feared this very moment. It meant, "My heart is with you. Do not give up. Wait for me." Then he was gone, dragged down the stairs, the sound of his stumbling footsteps swallowed by the boots of the soldiers. His daughter stood in the center of the wrecked apartment, utterly alone. The silence they left behind was a physical pain. She looked at the empty piano bench, the open door to the dark hall. Then, from outside, slowly at first, then building, came the sounds of the sweep they had tried to warn about shouting, the smash of breaking doors, the cries of protest. But they had been given a few minutes' warning. Because of her father's music, people had been ready. The printing press, she later learned, was already in a new hiding place, deep in the sewers. She walked to the piano. She brushed her fingers over the keys he had just played with such desperate force. She did not play. She could not, She had heard his final message. In the midst of the terror, he had given her a thread to hold on to, a note of pure, unbreakable love in their private language. The war had taken him, but it had not taken that. It could not take the song he had left ringing in her heart. She would wait. She would be his Solveig, and she would find a way to get him back. The world did not end when they took her father, but it changed into something colder and far more quiet. The apartment was a tomb of silence. The piano was a dark, hulking creature she could not bear to touch. Every creak of the floorboard was a hope that turned to dust. She went through the motions work at the hospital, the endless queues for water, the meager rations, but she moved like a ghost, her ears straining for a sound that never came. She did not know where they had taken him. No one did. The watchmaker's wife brought her a scrap of black bread, her eyes full of pity, but no news. The lieutenant across the street was gone, transferred or reassigned after the failed sweep that found nothing. Even that strange, silent understanding was over. Days bled into weeks. The siege tightened its grip. The shelling came closer, and the sound of hunger in the city became a low, constant hum. She felt herself fading, becoming as thin and brittle as the last leaf on a winter tree. Her father's final words, Solveig's song, were a treasure she kept locked inside, but they began to feel like a promise she could not keep. How do you wait when there is nothing left to wait for? Then, one morning, there was a knock. Not the savage blow of a rifle butt, but a hesitant human tap. She opened the door to find a young, tired-looking soldier she did not recognize. Her body went rigid, ready for the next blow, but he simply held out a small, dirty piece of paper folded in half. For the musician's family, he mumbled, not meeting her eyes, and turned to leave. With trembling hands, she unfolded it. There was no message. Just 5 lines of music, handwritten in neat, precise notation. It was the opening phrase of a simple old lullaby, one every child in the country knew. But someone had scribbled a single word beneath it in her language, patience. Her heart leapt into her throat. She knew that handwriting. It was the lieutenant's. He was telling her something. He was telling her Leff was alive, that it was the spark she needed. The news spread through the secret network. The blind pianist was in the old military prison on the east side. He was alive, but he was not well. The thread was found. Now she had to pull on it. Weeks more passed. The city was starving, but a different kind of energy crackled in the air, the rumor of an advance, of pressure from the outside. The occupying forces seemed edgier, quicker to anger, but also less thorough. They were preparing to leave, and in their chaos, there might be a chance that it came on a day of freezing rain. A message passed from the watchmaker's wife, who got it from a cleaner at the prison. A prisoner transport was leaving. In the confusion, identities could be lost, numbers could be miscounted. It was a slim, dangerous hope. That evening, she did something she had not done in months. She went to the piano. She dusted the keys with the corner of her apron. She sat on the bench that still held the shape of her father's presence. She did not play the code. She did not play a warning. She played Solveig's song. She played it slowly, pouring every ounce of her longing, her hope, her stubborn, wading love into the gentle, soaring melody. She played it for the empty apartment. She played it for the neighbors who might still be listening. She played it as a prayer into the weeping sky. Asterisk, I am here. I am waiting. Come home. Asterisk, she did not know if it would work. It was not a strategy, just a heart crying out in the only language it knew. The next morning, she went to the abandoned market square where the prisoner exchange was rumored to happen. It was a scene of chaos mud, shouted orders, the wails of families, the blank faces of broken men being loaded onto trucks. She scanned the lines, her eyes desperate, seeing nothing, Then she heard a cough, a dry, racking sound she knew in her bones. She turned. He was standing by the tailgate of a truck, looking smaller and impossibly frail, his clothes hanging off him. He was shivering, his face bruised, his eyes staring blindly ahead, as lost as she had ever seen him. A soldier was nudging him forward to climb up. She did not think. She ran. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the shouts, and threw her arms around him. He staggered, then his hands came up, touching her hair, her face, confirming she was real. "Papa," she sobbed. "My Solveig," he whispered, his voice a rough scrape of sound. "You played. Last night. In my dream, I heard you play." The soldier tried to pull them apart, barking that this was not the list. This prisoner was slated for the camp. But then another voice, tired but firm, cut through. "The paperwork is wrong. This one is for release. I have the correction here." She looked up. It was a different officer, older. But standing slightly behind him, she saw the young lieutenant. He gave no sign of recognition. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. But he was there. The note, this moment, it was his final, silent act in their strange symphony. The older officer grunted, checked a clipboard, and shoved left gently toward his daughter. "Go, before the order changes." She held her father tightly, supporting his weight, and led him away from the trucks, away from the mud and the despair, into the shattered city that was their home. He did not speak as they walked. He was a shell. That night, back in their apartment, he sat in his chair, touching the familiar arms as if he'd returned from the moon. He ate a few spoonfuls of thin soup and fell into a deep, troubled sleep. For days, he was like a ghost. He would start at loud sounds. He would sit for hours silent. The piano gathered dust. She feared the music in him had been extinguished forever. Then, one morning, the shelling stopped. A strange, thick silence fell over the city, more startling than any noise. People ventured into the streets, whispering. The siege was over. The occupying army was pulling out. The silence was overwhelming. It was the silence of shock, of trauma, of a breath held for years. Finally released, Dotlef sat by the window, his head tilted. He heard the silence. He heard the first hesitant calls between neighbors. He heard a child laugh, a sound so foreign it made him flinch. Slowly, painfully, he stood. His daughter moved to help him, but he waved her away. He felt his way to the piano. He did not sit. He just stood before it, his hands resting on the closed lid. Then he opened it. He felt for the bench and sat down. He placed his trembling, bruised fingers on the keys. He did not play a code. The code was over. Its work was done. He began to play. It was not Mozart or Beethoven. It was a piece by one of their own composers, a piece vast and stormy and full of struggle, but with a melody that climbed, relentless, toward a triumphant, aching light. He played it slowly at first, his fingers stiff and unsure. But as he played, memory and strength returned to them. He played louder, filling the apartment with a sound that was not a warning, not a signal, but a declaration. It was the sound of survival. From the street below, people stopped. They looked up. They listened. From open windows, they did not cheer. They were too tired, too broken for that. But they listened. And in their listening, they remembered. They remembered beauty. They remembered a time before the fear. They remembered they were still alive. His daughter stood in the doorway, tears streaming silently down her face. She was not crying for the pain anymore. She was crying for the sheer, stubborn resilience of the song. He played until his strength began to fade, finishing with a series of firm, resonant chords that hung in the quiet air like bells. When the last note faded, the new silence was different. It was not the silence of absence or fear. It was a quiet full of possibility. The kind of quiet that comes after a long, hard truth has finally been spoken. He turned his blind eyes toward where he knew his daughter stood. "It is over," he said softly. "No." "Papa," she whispered, walking to him and putting a hand on his shoulder. "It is just beginning." And outside, in the wounded but free city, the slow, hard work of living began again, accompanied by the memory of a blind man's music that had, in the darkest of times, taught them how to speak, how to warn, and finally, how to hope.